All right, so hopefully my audio is working correctly, and let's get started. So we have the residential buyer tenant representation. And again, if you've seen some of my previous videos, I like to just keep it really, really simple. I don't like adding any complexity to these things since they are complex already to somebody who's buying a property and are new to the entire process. So I just keep it really simple. And if you're an agent out there calling the buyer representation a contract or, you know, the Texas required contracts, anything that's going to scare the buyer, don't do that because really it's not about scaring the buyer into signing something or forcing somebody to sign something. We're out here helping people, and we want to be as helpful as possible and informational as possible. And so, when you're explaining these, just do it really, really simple. So let's cut right to the chase. You're going to have client information here, and you're going to have broker information here, which will be your brokered information. The area that you're working now, I tend to put DFW Metroplex, which is a wide location. You could specifically put the city if you're working just in Plano, if you're working in Fort Worth, for example, or Dallas, whatever it may be. It's really up to you and your brokerage. I put DFW Metroplex, and that's the boundaries of which you're working within, the constraints of what you're working in to show that particular client not to show, but to help them acquire a property. The term, I'm typically doing this for about 6 months. This is an older form, so I'm going to update it, or an older example, so I'm going to update it so I can use this as an example for the agents. But we're sitting at November now, so November 28th. Yeah, I'll do it till, usually I'm just gauging on when I think I might find them a property as well. So maybe not even that long. Let's just do it till about March. Okay, and we have broker obligations, we have client obligations. I'll usually explain this to the buyers as they're sitting there with me. I'm going to use my best efforts to assist you in acquiring a property. I'm going to assist you in negotiating and going through all the paperwork and making sure we get to the closing on time. Lots of other things I'm going to be doing, but that's my main objective, right? Is to help you find a property, negotiate that property, and get it under contract so that you can move on to the next step in your life. You also have obligations too, which is why I'm thankful for these forms being in writing, because it understands that on both sides, we both understand there's things that I'm going to do, there's things that you're going to do. And the main thing here is the exclusivity. So we're going to work together. You're only going to work with me as your agent, and I'm going to work with you as my client. And so they understand that there is that obligation that they have in order to work directly with you and letting other people know that you are representing them, and so on and so forth. If there's no relocation company that's being compensated or anything here that will provide benefits to the client when acquiring the property, you'll put NA here. Intermediary is an important paragraph. So under intermediary, we're explaining that an intermediary can only happen with an in-house transaction. So it has to be inter-brokerage, meaning our brokerage is called Vivo Realty. So if I have a listing that my buyer client is interested in, we would have an intermediary without appointments. So at that point in time within our brokerage, I would need to appoint somebody to my buyers so that they have representation, proper representation, and they can get advice. So you're just quickly sort of explaining that, not getting into a rabbit hole. If you want to take a deeper dive in intermediary, if you're very confused with that topic, perhaps I'll do another video, but don't get too caught up in that because it's a really simple concept. It can only happen with an in-house transaction, inter-brokerage transaction, and then you'll look to the brokerage as to best practices on how to handle intermediary, because we do not practice dual agency. The only way we're able to practice dual agency in the state of Texas was through Senate Bill 489, and that is that intermediary process that we have to go through. But don't get caught up on that. Don't confuse under that, so on and so forth. Competing clients, we're just letting them know that obviously there's other clients that may be in the same location. So we're going to be showing them some similar properties if that's the situation. Sometimes it's not, and you don't have other clients in that particular area. So it's a non-issue, but you do have to go over that. And that's something that I typically will go over when I'm explaining this buyer rep. Paragraph 11, I always talk about the money. Just get that money open out on the table, and that way you are just disclosing everything pertaining to that. And there's no question because people get very nervous about that stuff. Now, in the state of Texas and all around, there are no required commission or set commission. We can't set commissions to a certain amount, but generally speaking, there's a 3% commission that the brokerage is looking for as a buyer's fee. And so that fee is going to be paid for by the listing agent, listing brokerage, not the listing agent, but the listing brokerage to our brokerage. They're sharing that co-broker fee with us. Typically, there's 6% to work with, and they're sharing 3% with us. And so that fee is getting paid for by the listing brokerage. It's not getting paid for by the buyer. Now, the seller, when they sell a property, they understand that that's a part of the fee that they're going to have to pay for selling their home. And so a lot of buyers get confused about that, thinking that if they don't use a real estate agent, that they can get a commission back. And that's not the case, because you can only get a commission if you are a licensed agent in the state of Texas. So really, they need to understand that they're not paying anything out of the pocket for using us as an agent, which is fantastic because they can get representation, and they're not going to gain anything by not using us, because that fee can only be paid to another brokerage, cannot be paid directly to a buyer unless they are a licensed real estate agent. I sometimes will add this. I'm not going to do this to confuse, but if I'm also helping them look for a lease, I will put that in there as well. If we're not, we're simply going to just check off the NA here, because that's not applying to this particular deal. Because remember, this is a buyer tenant rep, so you may be representing them as a tenant rep also. And I won't really go into some of these provisions because, again, you can get yourself into a rabbit hole and confuse. I'm just going to go over the things that pertain to us. I may even say something to the effect of paragraph 11F doesn't apply to us. I'm putting NA there, and we're moving on. The protection period I will talk about, and I usually will say that, hey, if for whatever reason, starting the day this agreement ends, and for 90 days, any property that I call to your attention during that time, if you go and you buy that property, the brokerage will still receive a commission. And if you really dig into this, and we're not going to dig into this for the sake of time, it also talks about there even being a family member that happens to buy a property that you showed them. If you notice here, it says if a client or a relative of a client agrees to acquire a property identified in the notice during the protection period, client will pay broker upon closing the amount broker would have been entitled to receive if this agreement were still in effect. Now, the reason being is that you may have a situation where a buyer uses you as the agent to go find a property and then tries to cut out you as the agent to sort of get a better deal or try to do something like that. It's rare that this type of stuff happens, but in that regard, that's what that protection period is for. And I usually will go on to tell the buyers that I don't typically have issues with this, but this is something that our brokerage does put in these agreements. Collin County is the county that we're in, so the commissions must be paid there. And then we have the mediation and default paragraph. If things were to go astray, these are the things that would happen. And I always follow it up with, I never have issues with these agreements, but just so you know, these paragraphs are there to always protect us and to use best practices and things. And so obviously we'll try to mediate and negotiate in good faith if there's something were to go south with this particular agreement. But I don't have that happen in my regard, so we won't have to worry about that. And then I'll check off any addenda that we're going to have here. Usually it's going to be the information about brokerage services. I'm not going to touch special provisions because I don't have a need to do that, so I'm just going to put NA here. And we're moving on. We're getting this thing signed, and it's a pretty easy agreement to go over. I don't typically hem and haw and spending too much time on these. You may get somebody who's very tripped up about the paragraph that specifies the source of commission. So that's this paragraph here. Be prepared to answer that. What I usually will say is that could be a for sale by owner who is refusing to pay the broker. If they refuse to pay the broker, then in that regard, what the paragraph states is that you would pay the commission to the brokerage in order to pay our fee. Now, just to explain how this works, many for sale by owners don't know how to price their properties correctly. So if they were to price their property correctly, then our fee would have already been included in that. So technically, when you're looking on the MLS and so on and so forth, they have built in that commission amount to account for the closing costs that they're going to have. When there is a for sale by owner, they have not done that already. So dependent upon our offer, technically, whatever offer we submit on that property, the commission can still be paid for those proceeds. They usually will just have to look at a net sheet to see what their actual net is going to be after their closing costs are paid. And once I explain that to a for sale by owner, they understand our fee and all is fine. I've never had to deal with this in the 18 years that I've been practicing, so it's been a non-issue for me. And usually that'll make the buyer feel more comfortable. If they're just uncomfortable and they just don't want to fill out this agreement based on that paragraph, talk to your broker. Talk to your broker and see what you'd be willing to come up with to make that work. And there's usually some language or something that can be used to move things forward. Again, we're in the habit of moving the transaction forward and getting these buyers as clients, and for them to trust us, know us, like us, trust us. We're not trying to put anybody's feet to the fire, but of course we also need to be compensated as well. So we just want to make sure that they understand, and most of the time it's due to just education and explaining explaining how to explain that paragraph, or rather explaining that paragraph clearly. So that's it. That's buyer's representation. Again, quick and easy. I like it just keeping it really simple. We can take deeper dives later. Hope this has been helpful for you guys.